Welcome back, Inebri-art. This is Andy, as always. And we're closing in on episode 300, really quick. I never thought 7 years ago that we would be doing 300 of these, but who knows? It just kind of happens. So today I am joined by what I thought was just an illustrator, but apparently she's a writer and worked in comics. Angi Shearstone, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much, Andy. I'm glad to be here.
So uh, I stumbled across you on a Facebook group where I have friends who post there. The New England Horror. I'm going to screw up the name. The New England Horror Writers Group or something along those lines.
That's
Uh,
exactly it. New England horror writers.
and at the time, I thought you were just an illustrator, but you were just telling me that you do some writing and other things. Why is it? Because I'm kind of the same way, where creators kind of like to dabble in a bunch of different things.
Gotcha. That's a really good question, and I've kind of always sort of been that way. Like when I first started really enjoying like getting into art, and I mean this is like 10 or 12 that I'm taking it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked drawing pictures that went along with the stories I was reading, you know, and so I don't know if everybody's exactly like that, but that was the thing. Is like I like to read a lot, and so I really liked to illustrate those things, and that sort of grew to enjoying telling stories with pictures or combinations. Fast forward, some years later, late 80s, early 90s, I'm starting to read a lot of comic books. Uh, and, you
Were
know,
they Chromium glow in the dark variant comics or?
Not so much. Mostly, very much DC Vertigo. I was very much into the horror type stuff. I'm extremely thrilled that Sandman came out this week.
Oh, I haven't even started watching that yet. I'm kind of excited.
I've seen one episode, and it's because I'm watching it with a friend who's local. We
Hmm.
do a watch party where we call each other, but she's in Hawaii and she's a beekeeper, and her business is new and just been very booming the past week. So
Oh,
like
nice.
we haven't been able to coordinate, and so the local friend, we're like, okay, well, we'll watch one episode without her and let her catch up,
Yeah.
and then the rest is when can we next connect. But very much got into, like I said, the DC Vertigo, the sort of weirder stuff. I have there's a lot of great stories told with superheroes, but it never quite appealed to me as much.
I always find it interesting that people don't think of kind of the macabre and horror as a comic book thing, but it was one of the very early one. Like it was one of the earliest things that comics were about, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. That comics is just another storytelling medium. You don't assume all movies are action or all books are thrillers, but
Right.
there's this tendency, in some large part because the superhero genre sort of thrives in that. It's very well known,
Hmm.
and one of the things that sort of happened in that late 80s, early 90s is, yeah, you had the Sandman come in and Neil Gaiman start to write some really remarkable things, but and this is, I'll touch on this or whatever. Painted comics was another thing that was a very strong appeal to me. You had this neat thing happen where the cost of print and paper came down a little bit, and so you could print comics or graphic novels, trade paperbacks,
Yep.
something on a higher quality paper that could take more ink. So it didn't have to be the flat, bright colors. So that really lent itself to the horror look.
Sure.
The work of like Bill Sienkiewicz, and I mean Stray Toasters or Electric
Um,
Assassin,
the one I'm thinking of is I can think of the comic. I'm trying to think of his name. Ben Templesmith.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Um, so that look and watercolor was sort of like my big thing, and around that late 80s, early 90s, I'm doing my undergrad work in illustration. And so it really kind of happened at just the right time for me. So it developed my interest in like, hey, I like painting pictures and telling stories. And now it's more is being done with a style that really appeals to me. So that's part of why I sort of do both. But
Hmm.
then fast forward many years later, I started to separate it a little bit. I haven't worked in comics in a while, uh, but I don't know. I've always loved stories as the short version, and it took me a while to just decide to start writing them just as prose.
Yeah.
Uh, so I don't know. Um,
What? So I've always struggled with watercolor because I mean, it's no secret to anybody who knows me. I'm a little bit of a control freak, and watercolor, there's something about you just kind of have to kind of go with how it's going. Like I feel like there's less control.
so that is a perception,
Okay.
and that is a perception that I had when I was in college working as an undergrad. And there was something that I was working on for an assignment, and we were in class, and I was sort of letting the water sort of be all loosey goosey. And we're not on watercolor paper. We're on Bainbridge 80, illustration board, which
Yep.
has got a really nice fine tooth and can really take a bit of beating. And I'll never forget the day that the teacher's like, "All right, okay, hang on a second. We're gonna let this dry. I'm gonna be back in about 20 minutes, and we're gonna look at some other techniques." And that's when I sort of started to, you can control watercolor very, very, very carefully. And we're working with like a tiny, like Winsor Newton Series 7 sable brush that was, they're still like, $20 or $30. Back then, that was like, oh my gosh, this is the most expensive brush I've ever had.
Right,
And
right.
like, I don't know, maybe 15 at the time, which gets really super nice, high point. And with patience, you can get some color on there and a little bit of water. You don't have to make it, a lot of water and a lot of just adding color and let it. Although that is a strong appeal
Hmm.
with watercolor, it is harder to learn and harder to get it to do what you want it to do. Especially if you're trying to be an illustrator. If you're
Right.
doing fine art or something more abstract, hey, run with it. So that particular painting was a semi like photorealistic painting of strawberries, and that got into the Society of Illustrators student show. That was like the next year or something like that, and
Hmm.
I developed this sort of like basically photorealistic style painting like this. I don't know. Is your podcast video or is it just
No.
audio? Okay, I'm making a little super fine
Yeah.
gesture with my hand here with as if the paper's like right in front of my nose. So it's possible to do that, and it takes a long time and takes a lot of patience, and does speak to some of the strengths of watercolor because you can do some really beautiful color work and detail work that way. I did eventually down the line start to explore some more advanced, like and more loose and painterly watercolor techniques.
Hmm.
But you know that day, that teacher was like, "All right, hang on again." Dennis Nolan was his name. That was a pivotal point in my making friends with watercolor.
Yeah.
And I went on to the following year got another thing in the Society of Illustrators show and such. 1991. We're talking 30 years ago at this point in time, but you know.
That's
So,
it's roughly the same time I was in art school, but
okay, okay.
yeah.
So
Uh,
yeah.
so what from a kid, you said you got serious kind of like in 11 or 12 at that point where you're like, this is what I want to do professionally.
I don't think it started to click until I was maybe in my mid-teens. But it was a thing that I just loved to do.
Hmm.
I think like I liked reading a lot. I think I skewed introvert a lot, so like spending the summer underneath a tree reading a book and with a sketch pad or something like that was kind of my thing. But I was showing sort of early signs of being pretty good at it, you know.
Yeah.
And by 14, 15, you know, I remember, hey, just like, you know, the teacher I remember in college. I remember like in junior high, you know, this one teacher, you know, I'm running late because I didn't clean up in time, and so she's about to hand me a hall pass so I can be late to my. And she's like, "Have you always been so good at this?" And I it never gelled until that moment. So, uh, probably because I did it a lot,
Yeah.
I started to develop the skills sooner. I may have had some natural aptitude, but that was probably the turning point, maybe 14, 15, where teachers were like, you know what, you may want to think about doing this.
I feel like that's kind of that standard age where, something kind of clicks, and it's one of those, which comes first, chicken or the egg kind of thing,
Yeah.
where was it the interest in doing it or the skill? Because, I am very much, I hate the term talent because it diminishes all the work that artists put in.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it is a skill and it's a teachable skill. Um, and so it was right around that age for me. My youngest just turned 18, and they were similar in junior high. Something clicked, and they always had a sketchbook, and so it just seems there's something about that age, and whether it's, I've always said like artists tend to have, and I shouldn't say artists, creative people tend to have demons, and it's either like can't tell if the creative process helps them work out their demons or causes the demons. But I feel like
Right.
that puberty age is kind of like a really trying time, and those us creative types find solace in that like creative process at that time.
I absolutely think so. I mean, I think that's a component. It is a turbulent time. Teenagers, like you're starting to become the person you're going to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you have the bizarre chaos of high school and I went to a high school like my graduating class was well over 500 people,
Uh,
so very I don't know, all sorts of different kinds of people and trying to figure out how to fit in, where do you fit that, learning to date and going through the bodily changes, and for me, talk about demons. So my family was a little odd. A lot of people, nobody has a Brady Bunch family, but
right.
like some of us maybe, one parent had a very significant mental illness that sometimes meant institutionalizations. The other parent dealt with it by the alcohol,
Right. Yeah, sure.
So, in addition to some of that, at 14, I have a sister who's 7, and I'm in large part partly responsible for making sure her homework gets done and
Yeah.
she gets fed and she's got some clean clothes for school. So, art also became, a certain amount of me time and a certain amount, and I think it's a tool for dealing with, but also processing complex emotional stuff. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah,
And it's funny because like now I'm kind of like thinking back and like, yeah, it was like, I grew up in, normal middle America or suburb town. Um we weren't wealthy, but we weren't poor, and but
yeah,
like this, my sketchbook was mine. Like there weren't restrictions, there weren't obligations, there were no rules other than what I set, and that's one of those things I think artists have to constantly try to work around, is like, oh, there's no reason why I have to draw the full person at figure drawing. I can draw the hand if I am curious about the hand or whatever, and kind of just breaking out of your own type of rules. But it was like mine. I could do what I wanted when I wanted.
yes, and in that zone of like being a young adult, adolescent, whatever, and more expectations out of you in terms of responsibilities at high school, as well as extra ones of responsibilities to my family, to do as much as I can. Yeah, sort of figuring out how to carve something out for yourself that really is just you, and you make up the rules of, like, you know what, no, it is just the hands today, it is not the whole figure. And uh you know and that being part of decisions you make as you're growing up, in that, like, hey, we've thrown math and science and art and music, you've had little pieces, and uh I went through, it was a big school, but it was suburban, it was
Yeah.
Connecticut. And was a decent art program and music program, and you've had all this stuff in front of you, for so many years of your life throughout elementary school and junior high and whatnot. And you're starting to make your choices of, like, well, what is going to look good to me on the other end of that? Like it's not just, hey, you have the whole figure, do you want to focus on that? Hey, you've had a taste of all of the things that you might do with graduation, still a few years down the line, but within sight. What are you going to do with that? Well,
Yeah.
I was like, well, and you're sort of developing and honing in on the things. Like I said, you're developing the person you're going to be, right? And also developing, you know, uh, the things that you most like to do. And I think some of that is an accumulation of, like, the things you've done with your brain to that point in time, but external factors, maybe some natural aptitude, but like you said, you worked hard to develop that, and yeah.
It's interesting. Like, you're kind of making me think about like artist styles now, and it's like I don't ever think of myself as having a style, but I assume that like I do because people can look at something and go, "Oh, that's yours." Um, it, it's for me, any style that I do have is not a conscious decision. To develop your style, where you consciously like, okay, I want to be this kind of artist, or did it just kind of grow organically?
Good question. Because I was very into, like, strong drawing skills. Like, as much as I'm drawing, the elves or the monsters that I'm reading about, uh, a lot of the things that I did was like, it's a photograph of my favorite rock star, so I'm gonna
Yep.
sit and I'm gonna draw that. So there was a lot of that. And that watercolor. Fast forward into college, it's like I have this photograph of strawberries, and I'm blowing it up like 800%, but I'm still trying to get as much realistic detail in there. So there's part of me that just loved making something that really looked like something, and I mean, people thought that picture of the strawberries was a photograph, if
Yeah.
I had it on my wall. And, so some of it was just that appeal of, like, wow, you're so good. Look at that. That looks like a photograph, and sort of enjoying that sort of feedback. But, well, fast forward a little bit further, I always liked other styles of art, but I was never very good at a lot of the looser things. I was never great at, like, loosening up. So I went to grad school in 2001 to 2003, and some of the classes and teachers I worked with were sort of deliberately about loosening up.
Hmm.
And I took a class in Chinese brush painting where you're ink on rice paper, and you don't there's no forgiving in there at all. Like,
Yeah.
that ink is there, there's no fidgeting. I mean, yeah, you can do some sort of detail, but there's no, like, okay, that's the wrong color, let me lift that up, and let me, like,
Once it's there,
uh
it's there. Yeah.
yeah, as well as being introduced to some techniques. I had George Pratt as a teacher there. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design,
Hmm.
and so my master's degree is in sequential art, comic books.
Yeah.
George Pratt is one of the comic book painters that and he was like an artist in residency just for a quarter there, and I was lucky enough to have him while
Oh,
I
it's
was,
awesome.
on my first quarter, and he's got a really beautiful painterly style, and and him trying to translate that to some of us, there's Bert Silverman wrote this book called Breaking the Rules of Watercolor, and it's this, technique of, painting on plate Bristol, which is like super smooth, and putting like a layer of like white watercolor down first, so, and then putting like working it like you would in oils, right?
Yeah,
So, and then you put color on top of that, and you work subtractively with water, just like you might tone a canvas and then use turpentine
to pull
to
it
pull
off.
the
Yeah.
oil off. So you get this really um, atmospheric aesthetic and very modeled aesthetic that you know suddenly made sense. So and I've always liked playing with different kinds of styles. uh you know Early on, like I said, it was that drawing skill of like making a thing that looked like a thing. um and I tried throughout the 90s, being like, like maybe about 1993 or so, like I had an idea for a comic, and I'm trying to work it on myself, and I'm not getting that loose style that I love, that I see, like I said, Bill Sienkiewicz or Kent Williams, George Pratt, Scott Hampton, that uh and it's one of the things that I went to grad school for, was like, what, maybe it would do me some good to get some more instruction, as well as, oh my gosh, it's an actual comic book program.
Yeah.
uh I can learn about storytelling as well, and script writing, and yeah. So I actually have sort of lost track of exactly where I was going with
Welcome to the podcast. That's usually how it goes.
that.
Yeah.
But
But it's interesting because I told you my youngest is an artist, and we were talking the other day. We just hung a handful of their pieces at a local restaurant. Their senior project was painting on skateboards,
nice.
and sold two right away. So they're very excited. And I was texting with them the other day, and Zoe's like, "Oh, I'm painting on canvases right now, but I don't really like it. It's kind of boring." I believe their exact quote is, "It's not weird enough." And so we just kind of started the conversation, and this is the stuff that I love about art: is if you find it boring, make it interesting. And I'm like, well, there's no reason why you can't tear a hole in that canvas. There's no reason why you can't add spray foam to that canvas. There's no reason why you can't stitch four of those canvases together in a three-dimensional shape and go from there. And they're just like, oh my God, you're right. And I'm like, yeah, don't like, art is the one thing where it's important to learn the rules and then immediately go, okay, how do I break the rules?
Yes, absolutely. I will always have a great level of appreciation for that. Like, all right, let's learn to control this watercolor, because that gave me the skills to better build off of.
Right.
So like I said, years later, breaking the rules of watercolor. Where you're learning, oh, well, just scratch into it, scrape into it, pull some of that paper off. And I mean, working on that Bainbridge 80 is and I mean, computers hadn't quite turned into a thing yet.
Yeah.
You're just on the cusp of, in that sort of 1990s zone, where, you're still trying to get super clean artwork to, the publisher or whoever, who made, take a high quality photograph of it, or a photostat, for crying out loud. Scanners are getting there, but, high quality ones are drum scanners. So,
Mm-hmm.
the stories of like peeling carefully that top layer off of the illustration board so it could be mounted on a roller for the scanner. And like, now I can't even imagine, just a nightmare, like, but the idea, like really trying to protect that surface, and working towards a super clean look, because it was an illustration program. Yeah, yeah, you
Right.
might get into books and you might start doing things in comics and whatever in your own style, but somebody may be like, "Oh no, we need an illustration for this thing that's got to be a bowl of fruit, and it can't have smudges on it. It can't have like
Yep.
this sort of sacred, for lack of a better term, environment where you're trying to just make a super clean image rather than something that might have cat fur in it.
Do you? Because I mean, where it's I mean, that whole drink and draw movement started because artists were like, "Oh, it's such work now."
Yeah.
Um, when you get, illustration work and it's something that you're not super jazzed about doing, if it's the 500th painting of um strawberries that you're doing, like how do you stay at that same engagement level as something that you're super excited about?
So that's a good question. I think I'm lucky in that there's something about the process. There's something about just painting that my brain loves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I might get a little bit bored, like like sometimes if I'm doing something like in Illustrator on the computer, that if it's technical and it's another, what have I done that's just like, oh my gosh, they would be like, like a map of a neighborhood, development maps,
Sure.
where they're
Yeah.
separating all the lots and everything like that. And I'm like, and they've got to have, rather than just the really, really awful sort of blueprinty line thing, they need something that's color coded with all the stuff. And, it's just like, it's another box. But, in that case, one of the things that I often do with more tedious work is I would listen to podcasts or audiobooks, or sometimes just music, not,
Yeah.
while doing it and enjoy that. And that would be a thing that would sort of help me concentrate or help me not be, whatever by the tediousness of it. And oddly, I remember, George Pratt, when I was talking to him, being like, how can I loosen up my style? And he'd be like, oh, well, it's easy. Just have a glass of bourbon there while you're painting, you know? And, uh, if that works for you, awesome. I am not going to judge anybody, but I did kind of mention that there was some, alcohol.
History. Yeah.
I never wanted to associate it with work, or successful work. That was a choice that I felt like I had to make. I've never really had a capital P problem, but like definitely like in college and there were times that I was probably hitting it a little heavy, and it was like keeping it separate. Just because there's enough family history there that I could see that being not going well.
Yeah.
you know?
And it's, I mean, it is a tale as old as time. I mean, for
Yeah.
creative people, it really does. There's no question that drugs and alcohol loosens you up. And, some people can be like, oh, it opens, portals into blah, blah, whatever. I don't care what your excuse is. It definitely shuts down that part of your brain that's second guessing your impulses.
Yes. The
But
the
then,
sensor, the
yeah,
internal, yeah.
but then the problem is you get to that point where you're banned or whatever. You're like, okay, time for rehab, everybody. And it's literally at what cost? And I mean, I know I've talked about it on the podcast before, but it's like such a slippery slope. And
Yeah.
it probably goes wrong more than it goes right.
Right. And I can't say that I've never, I mean, like fast forward even further, like, hey, I'm in my early 50s now. Like, and I was writing the other night and I just like one of the characters really likes scotch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I just want a glass of scotch. And I'm like, you know what? Like, we're not going to make this a habit. We're
Yeah.
sort of towards the end of the day, and I just, or end of the, productivity. It's probably like 9:30 at night at that point in time. Like, let's just have a little bit, but not as a creative thing, but just as a,
As
like,
the act of enjoying a glass of scotch.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So, and I've had like, something like that, you know. So it hasn't been part of the creative process, but it's been you know what, it's hot. I want a gin and tonic. I'm not done with this painting, but I'm gonna get started on the gin and tonic before I'm, you know, like.
Yeah.
But very rare. If I thought about it really hard, I've probably still done that. You know, I could probably count it on one hand. You know,
It's weird of those certain things like I would never call myself a smoker,
right.
but my mom got sick years ago, cancer, and unfortunately passed. But there was
I'm
one
sorry.
day that we were at the emergency room and I bummed a cigarette off of my sister, and it took me 2.5 years to quit. um
Oh yeah, yeah. So I know I hear you on that
Yeah,
because
and sometimes I'll like, especially Peaky Blinders, if you're familiar with that on Netflix, I'll watch that and I'll go, "Oh my god, I want a cigarette so bad!" Like just when I watch that. Any other time I'm fine, but like watching that, I'm like, it looks
so
so
yeah.
good.
Yeah. And I never went down that rabbit hole, but I, you know, briefly, but bumming like my sister was a smoker for a while.
Yeah,
I believe she's quit. I mean, it's been a while since I don't nag her or anything, but like my father was a smoker. He passed from emphysema, you
yeah,
know, leading to a heart attack. His father, same thing. So I was never a smoker. But there was a point where like if I was hanging out with her, we went out to eat, you know, she just loved to light up right after dinner. I'm like, yeah, let me try this. And I'll never forget the day where I'm like, I'm never doing this again. Like we did it and I'm like, I can really, really see the appeal to this. I'm never doing this again. No. You know, because
yeah,
like
yeah,
and again, like it's not that I've never smoked a cigarette. Again, that I could probably count on two hands, which over 50 years, you know, spread
yeah.
out over years. I never bought a pack. It was never a habit. It was always like, yeah, sure. Like some of it was, you know, when I was going to goth clubs and
Sure,
sorry,
yeah.
really handsome guy who kind of looks like, you know, Lestat offers me a clove cigarette, you know, I'm gonna say yeah.
It's always the clove ones, man. Like I think regular ones taste like trash, but like clove one, I can do that.
Yeah.
I'm down with that.
So, but yeah, some of it is sort of recognizing where the demons might come from and controlling them, if you can. And I mean, some of it, you know, in part because of the family, and in part because of the kind of person I am. I've kind of always kept an eye on those demons, you
Yeah.
know, or the potential for them, you know. And I should knock on wood that I'm lucky to have been able to do that, you know. Challenges on other end of spectrum, you know. I mean, like a lot of other artists, I've still struggled with, you know, different kinds of mental health, just
Hmm.
chronic fatigue, you know, depression, anxiety. You know what? Well, turning off the sensor while painting, that's one of the things that like listening to podcasts or listening to audiobooks would help do. It would shut that down. You know, I only very recently have been sort of diagnosed and treated for ADD as part
Hmm.
of all the other stuff going on. You know, super brief. You know, I can't have any conversation without saying this. Almost 6 years ago, I was in a car accident and hit my head.
Ooh.
Yeah, hit my head really good and had, you know, a few years of post concussion syndrome, mild TBI, severe light sensitivity, severe audio sensitivity, and an audio processing issue.
Hmm.
That as I've finally started to come out of that and sort of got a sense for, well, what is brain going to be like now?
Yeah.
Trouble concentrating, trouble with this, trouble with that, and figuring out like how much of this is the injury and how much was that high
Always there.
pacing
Yeah.
ADD all along, and that like, you know, listening to an audiobook while doing super hyper detailed stuff, like that may have been a pretty clear sign had I maybe been of a generation where people were like, you know what, that's not normal, you know, or whatever normal is. Nobody's,
Yeah.
you know, neurotypical is
Yeah.
whatever, you know. But
But
yeah,
you made that work in your favor, really. That's kind of the key to it.
yeah, I became addicted. Well, I became addicted to the story, you know, because
Yeah.
so rather than being like, oh, you know, my brain's running about this thing, and I'm not in, maybe I'm not focusing on the painting. I'm gonna worry about something else, or I'm gonna just go get something out of the fridge, even though I'm not actually hungry.
Hmm.
It was like, you know what? No, like, and it was a great tool. Like, listen to 45 minutes or hours worth of podcast or a chapter of a book, audio book, and then if I could do a playlist and then throw two or three songs in there, it reminds me to stand up, take a break, go to the bathroom or whatever else it might be, grab a snack, stretch my legs. But I want to hear what happens next in the audiobook. So
Right.
like, yeah, so like, and so to get back into the book and get that brush back in hand, and and I forget about this, but like, two of my close friends were illustration majors with me, and so and they were roommates. I would often go over to their on campus apartment if we had an all nighter because we had a deadline the next day,
Hmm.
and 4-person apartment. So their two other roommates were, you know, an English major and a communications major, and they would read to us,
Oh, that's
sometimes
cool.
while we were. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Sometimes it'd be like, well, something that one guy that Bill had written, and sometimes it would be like Samurai Cat or Dave Barry, or I'm trying to think of something else. Would just be like, okay, it's
Yeah.
really cool, and so.
Is there a connection between what you're listening to and what you're working on? So if you're working on some sort of monster illustration, are you listening to more, dark music or like true crime podcasts or?
So no, I've never actually done that. Like I've painted some beautiful landscapes where I'm like I was listening to Stephen King, or whatever, or
And a little body hidden in there somewhere.
yeah, yeah. I so no, I sometimes it's governed by, all right, this is a short project. I might be able to do this in a day. Is there a short uh like novella
Hmm.
audio, like, oh, this is only 5 hours, I could probably get through this, and or this is going to be maybe you know 2 days of 6 hours each. This is 12 hours, let me listen to that. So there's uh but like I will sometimes make a choice to not listen to things that are too dark if everything else is really dark. Not necessarily the illustration, but like the world. Like, I
Oh,
mean,
so you haven't listened to anything dark in like 4 years.
yeah, right. I have slowly worked my way back into some Stephen King.
Yeah.
There have been some things where I'm like, yeah, no, I can't listen to this now. Yeah,
You
because
just have
yeah.
Bobby McFadden on a loop. The Don't Worry Be Happy guy. Just on a
Don't
loop.
worry, be happy. Well, yes. Well, I love ska. I love ska.
Yeah.
I love ska core. So I listen to like the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones
Sure.
and Real Big Fish and Rancid and stuff. So very upbeat, type stuff is the music I enjoy most. Um, so yeah, it's like weird. It's always been this mixed bag, that I listen to a lot. I came into the pandemic coming off of 3.5 years of relative isolation
Oh,
and
right.
and
Because of your
significant
injury.
depression,
Yeah.
because like it was very hard to, like, oh, hey, we're gonna go out to a restaurant, we're gonna go out to a bar. Well, that audio processing thing meant, like, at best, I could function for a little bit and then would need to leave.
Sure.
More commonly, I would get a migraine, which is almost an insult to migraines to call it a migraine,
Hmm.
that might last for days or weeks. Like, in addition to, and it was because my brain had to work a lot harder to filter out background noise and understand what was being said and just keep up with, and it was very, very isolating.
Yeah.
And not being able to work to support myself, having to live in a friend's spare room with my cats,
Yeah.
uh, and I mean, literally, I was at a restaurant with a friend, you know, February 2020. And she's like, "You're doing a lot better, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I
I
think
can't wait to get out in the
I
world.
can't wait to get out more. Maybe we can start writing in coffee shops
Yeah.
again, like
Yeah.
because we had done that. Like it's like yeah, blah blah blah. 3 weeks later, everything's closed.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
and I survived.
Yeah.
I made it through, but it was really, 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 really really super hard. Like I had just got my own place, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm gonna rebuild my business, and I'm gonna. It's kind of hard with everything closed,
Oh,
like
I hear you. Yeah, it's
yeah. So, and I hadn't been on anybody's radar in a while,
mhm.
so a little less common for people. Like I had a couple of friends who were like, okay, we'll check in on her or whatever, but they started to struggle with their own depression, and they're like, because the world like everybody's had a really hard time.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying oh poor little me, but it was like it
Yeah, it was
was
tough.
it,
Yeah.
it was a little extra whatever, and a lot of some people had to.
Mhm.
Everybody was struggling, and it was sort of like I'd been sort of pulled out of the water and rescued from drowning, and I was kind of okay, and probably needed to go, needed a little help getting back on my feet, and then a tidal wave came and hit everybody,
Right. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
couldn't be like, hey, I still need help because everybody's running from the tidal wave,
Yeah. It was
So
crazy times.
yeah.
So let's plug your book. That you it's so it's a collection of stories, right? It's not just yours, right?
Right. So
Yeah.
yeah. So that was for the New England, not the New England horror writers. I was promoting it on one of their
Right.
horn. It was for the Horror Writers of Maine. They come out with a periodic thing called Northern Frights. I've been as a writer. First thing I ever got published was as Angi Shearstone, but now under Sydney Arcane. I've had a couple stories, but also did the illustrations for. It was a women's only thing, and
Oh,
it
nice.
was like March of 2022.
Hmm.
And it's got the fish people, the fish women on the cover, and I did the spot illustrations for the. It's a collection or an anthology from different writers, with illustrations to go with most of the stories.
Nice. And where can people go to find your work or what else you're working on, all that?
Gotcha. AngiShearstone.com is probably the a good place to start. That is where my art is. When I have other stuff going on, that there is links to other page. BloodDreams.com is the comic book project I was working on that I've turned into a novel, and that has been on hiatus, and I'm finally getting back to it, but the website really needs a lot of attention. And I will know Angi is Angi,
Hmm.
no E at the end, and then Shearstone,
Shearstone is exactly how it sounds.
Sharstone. Yeah. And creativityandcats.com is where I try to blog, and that happens about once every 6 months, maybe. You know?
Well, that's a schedule. That's still a
and, and,
schedule.
and a lot of it has been brain injury lately, and
Yeah.
a lot of it has been like the boss tones broke up. like like it's whatever I happen to sit and have had my in my brain for 5 weeks and finally need to get out so I can write something else. I really hope to make something more consistent out of it. But that's where I occasionally stick my head in.
Nice.
But yeah.
Yeah.
But the fine art in particular and my illustration, AngiShearstone.com, that's the thing that is reasonably updated.
Excellent. Well, Angie, I want to say thank you for taking the time to talk to us. This was a lot of fun. You're welcome back. Anytime you're promoting anything, please reach out and we'll get you back on the show.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you so much, Andy. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you saw my little post at the New England Horror Writers, and yeah, I'm gonna put your podcast into my listen while painting rotation.
Awesome.
You
That's
know,
outstanding.
so
You can avoid the earlier ones. Not that the guests aren't great. They're just the sound quality is not awesome.
okay, yeah, that's all right.
Uh,
Everything's gonna work out the kinks.
but so speaking of that, like we are at episode 299, and the last episode I did I realized it's been almost 300 episodes. We don't have like a real sign off. It's always kind of bothered me. We got into podcast, or I got into podcasting because Nerdist was one of my favorites, and at the end, it's always enjoy your burrito was their sign off. On one of
Yeah.
our other shows, we end it with this is the part where we stop talking. And since I'm interviewing creative people, I've decided that the best thing to do is to put it on you guys. So give us an ending, give us a sign off, give us a way out to end the podcast.
Oh my gosh. Uh, this crunch all you want, we'll make more. I don't know.
Perfect. That works.
I don't know what sort of snack that's from, but I feel like I've just ripped off a commercial. But
I think you did, but that's all right.
all right.
Fair
Crunch
use.
all you want, we'll make more.
And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. Thanks again for listening.